The way I came into becoming a pastor is a little bit different than most of the other pastors that you probably grew up with. Because you see, I didn't grow up and then say, you know what, I'm going to go to college and go become a pastor. Or I want this to be my career, I'm going to go become a pastor. To me, it was never about career. It was always about something that I felt called to do. But when I say always, there's even a little caveat on that, because if you were to go back to Joseph graduating from college, this wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't something I considered. I was a non-pastor, somebody who, still wanted to go to church and still wanted to be active and get involved, but I wasn't necessarily that pastor type individual. But something started changing that actually started making me think, I think that I'm being driven more in this direction. And it was when I started looking at specifically what the role of a pastor is. I think this is something that's valuable to talk about because it helps us to understand for ourselves what should we be doing when we are safeguarding our own hearts as we listen to other spiritual influences in our lives, whether those are speakers, pastors, other individuals that we entrust with our discipleship. And it also helps us to be able to discern whether we are maybe doing our own job, whether there are things that maybe in our heads we are assuming, maybe culturally, is the role of a pastor, when in reality, that's something that we should be doing. It's something that we don't have to wait until some high priest comes down and, gives us this little bit of Jesus. It's something that we can go out and just freely get on our own. Let me tell you what I mean by that. When I was doing youth ministry, there was something that was kind of fascinating, and I was reminded of it recently when a ministry friend brought it up and put it online. And it was the survey that basically asked individuals in the church, whose responsibility is it to be the primary exposure of your children to Jesus? And when you ask the general church population, it was something like 55% said that should happen at home, and 45% said that primary exposure should be in church. And when you ask parents, it was about the same, but maybe not shockingly, it was the number shifted a little bit more in favor of in church. It was 49% of people said at home should be primary exposure to Christ, and 51% said that it should be the church. But what about when you start talking about ministry leaders, these people who study the Bible in and out, who have dedicated their lives towards giving Jesus to other individuals? What would they say? Surely, because they've dedicated their lives to giving children and youth Jesus, surely they would say, oh yeah, it should happen at church. Other way around. Ministry leaders for children, 95% said primary exposure should be in the home. Now, why would they say that? I mean, after all, we have these churches with all these programs. I can tell you right now, I had an individual get very angry with me a good number of years ago because I was bringing up this exact subject. And they basically said, how dare you make any kind of presumptions about, what fits best for me and what works best for my household. And this was the only thing I could think, is that when I open up the Bible, the thing that is supposed to drive what we know about God, what we know about Christ, and the things that they taught us, I don't see anything in there that says that churches need to have these specific church programs because otherwise people won't get Christ. The reality is that youth programs in particular were something that didn't even really start popping up until the 1960s and 1970s. And so if you really want to be facetious, you would say, well, boy, if we all need youth programs and children's programs, then I wonder how you had, nearly 2,000 years of Christians getting Jesus from generation to generation. But I don't want to get specifically into the children and youth thing. If we wanted to, trust me, we could definitely get into that. But instead, what I want to focus on is that difference between what pastors thought versus what a lot of other individuals that were responding to the survey thought. You see, there was a difference in there. And I think that's something that if we ask ourselves, we would probably have to say that, no, we probably do have different ideas of what we think a pastor should be. I mean, what do you think a pastor should be? Should a pastor be somebody who can effectively run a 501c3 religious nonprofit organization? Should a pastor be somebody who's responsible for upholding the cultural norms of society? Or is there something else that's actually supposed to be the main primary role of a pastor, with all that other stuff really just being fluff? Well, if we sit here and we go to the 2 letters that Paul wrote to Timothy, we see a great explanation of not only what type of person should be a pastor, but also what those duties start looking like. So as you sit here and you read a couple excerpts from the letters to Timothy, I want you to ask yourself, what do you expect a pastor to be? And then how do those expectations compare to the things that the Bible seems to put up as on a pedestal as the most important traits of an individual that we entrust with our spiritual development? Now, one of the things I really like that Paul does here is he actually goes in these letters and he describes a number of things that we should be doing and a number of things that we should look at really honestly as red flags. And I think when you look at those red flags, that honestly is probably the most enlightening thing that we could probably pay attention to in our world, because we have so many different choices in religious leaders, right? I mean, you can turn on the TV, you can turn on the radio, you can pop on YouTube, even looking at religious videos on TikTok and see all kinds of people who are professing to tell you the truth. So how is somebody to discern when we are being influenced by these pastoral or pseudo-pastoral influences that maybe are leading us down a bad path? Well, once again, in these two letters to Timothy, we see several different red flags. You know, one of the things we see is obviously false doctrine. It's something you see so common today. People who are basically creating their own doctrine. I would use the word they're innovating on the doctrine of the Bible in order to make it more relevant for modern audiences. And in doing that, there's a real danger. Now, that's not to sit here and say you should go full bore the other direction, which is totally ignore the culture in which you're living in. But you do have to acknowledge that truth is truth. And if individuals are claiming to live for a God that is true yesterday, today, and tomorrow, is unchanging, is never ending, is eternal, but yet they also suggest that what is truth is malleable, that is dangerous false doctrine. It can lead us astray, and ultimately it can end up leading in you missing out on the blessings of what Christ has for you in this life. You also see people who love disputes. And look, I love a good dumpster fire. I mean, there's something about, just a little bit of chaos that objectively is funny to watch. And don't act like I'm sitting here, being somehow, an unusual person for this, because everyone loves some drama. You just got to hop on Facebook for 5 minutes and you will find tons of it. That's kind of in human nature, but there's a difference between, kind of having this casual whatever appeal to disputes versus somebody who actively seeks that stuff out. Somebody who tries to sow seeds of discord, who tries to poke and prod, somebody who tries to be divisive in society. And that has a lot of different ways that it can manifest itself in our society, from individuals who poke fights just simply because, to be honest, they're just not great people, all the way to people who maybe through their own arrogance, thinking that they have the correct political ideology, thinking that they have, the single correct interpretation of this or that, maybe are eager to launch into these attacks and arguments rather than discussions about what they believe because it makes them feel better. That is cancerous behavior in any context, especially when that individual is supposed to be a pastor. One of the other things that you end up seeing in these red flags is you see individuals who are obsessed with pursuits of the flesh, whether that is money, which is primarily what the letters to Timothy focus on because of the situations that Timothy was in. But, that extends to any other thing. People who want, who are pursuing branding, whether that's personal individual branding or whether it's branding of kind of this church organization that they run. People who maybe even promote a certain degree of worldly promotion for you, this prosperity gospel or, becoming a part of this because look at all these things you have. If you're not careful, sometimes you can start seeing very program-driven churches even going in this direction, where suddenly how the church is oriented starts becoming more about what it can provide to you in terms of your worldly convenience, and it becomes less about the truth that they're trying to give you. There's many other red flags, but take a look at some of these and how Paul words that and see how these red flags manifest themselves to you in your life and in the lives of the people around you. Now, fortunately, Paul also gives us some green flags, I guess you could say. He gives us some good signs of an individual that has their head screwed on straight, an individual who is pursuing God, and in doing that is trying to live in a way that they are fulfilling the calling of what it means to be a pastor. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to demonize the fact that there are many other things that pastors today in our American society are expected to do. Pastors, in reality, you do have to have some business savvy. You do have to have some organizational skills. You do have to have some of these traits just as a matter of pragmatics. But it's important to understand that those are cultural things. Those are factors that result from us living in this man-made world that we're in, and not things that are divine. And those are the things that we should be basing our determination of whether somebody is a God-fearing, God-following pastor, a God-fearing, God-following spiritual influence in our life. When you look at what Paul describes, he describes somebody who pursues truth, who pursues trying to be a pure individual. And what I think is kind of a neat connection is Paul describes in one instance somebody who is gentle, and then immediately following in the very next verse talks about fighting the good fight. And when you look at that language in there, there's almost a corollary there that you can draw between what Paul is saying about a good pastor and what Christ says when he commissions the 12 disciples, saying that I'm calling you to be as shrewd as snakes and as harmless as doves. That dichotomy of gentleness, but then yet being willing to stand firm and fight. I think that's such a beautiful correlation to make, because it really tells us what the awesome responsibility of a pastor should be and what we should expect out of individuals that are spiritual influences in our lives. These are not people that we should be looking at because they are the cleanest impression of, what a professional pastor should be, or because they, have all of the right check boxes that, make them look like a dynamic, charismatic, whatever individual, Lord knows if all those things were the requirements, I don't know why you'd be listening to me every single week. But what we should be doing is trying to find people and trying to follow people, listen to people, learn from people that we feel have a heart for Christ, people who have a heart for loving other people, and individuals that are going to stand up for their calling even when culture may be distracting them with all kinds of other distractions. So there's two main takeaways that I have for you here today. And the first is the thing that really we've been hammering here, for most of this message, which is what is a pastor expected to do? Because there's a degree of, I'll say, accountability. And this isn't, it's a little bit of a different type of accountability, but there's an accountability in terms of who we let ourselves be influenced by. There's going to be all kinds of individuals who are going to profess to speak for God. Individuals who profess to know these, special divine truths and whatnot. But there's going to be individuals that you see, and the truth they seem to preach is something that comes from this place of humility, this place of knowing that I'm preaching this truth as God has communicated it, knowing that God is so far beyond even a holy man's comprehension. But what I know is what I want to give, because this is blessing, this is goodness, this is grace, this is gospel, this is love, and this is what I want to give to my people. That is what we need to find in spiritual influences. For myself, for you, for everybody, we need those influences in our lives to build us up, to challenge us, to keep us accountable. And if there's somebody that you're following and all they ever do is they just make you feel good about yourself, or they just kind of give you this nice little thing that you can do and say, that's a nice little reminder I get every single week. But they are not challenging you, they're not pushing you, they are not encouraging you whenever you're feeling down and building you up, then maybe you need to go look somewhere else for, some kind of spiritual nourishment, because spiritual nourishment should come really via a pastor, just as a funnel of something that is much bigger than that one individual. That's the first lesson. The second takeaway that I have for you here is, what is our role? Because sometimes I think that we do slip into this trap of seeing what culture has placed upon pastors, and then we say, oh, well, there's certain things I don't have to worry about. I don't really have to worry about sitting here and studying the Bible all that much. I know I'm supposed to read it. I don't really have to study it. That's the pastor's job, right? No, that's not what the Bible says. As far as serving other people, I mean, I got to wait until there's, some kind of big program that takes place at the church and a bunch of people organize it and we have a sign up and all that. No, you can do that on your own. These are things that the church should help you do. They should augment, but rest assured that the things that God has for us are things that are not intended to go through a high priest. That is the whole reason why Christ came and destroyed the temple. That's why he talked right before his crucifixion about tearing the curtain and whatnot, and that, when he was crucified, that the thing that separated the Holy of Holies from the outside was ripped. It was destroyed. It's because that separation between the Creator and the creation is gone. And when we sit here and we allow ourselves to put pastors or to put church bureaucracy in between us and the Creator, we're completely negating the entire blessing of what Christ came to do. Christ came to die for your sins, period. He didn't come to die by proxy of the church or by proxy of the pastor or anything like that. Christ came, he loved you, and he died on the cross for you. That's what Christ did. And if that's what Christ did and we understand that, then we should live accordingly. Having the church, having pastors to encourage us, to move us along, to give us, that little bit of extra oomph that we may need to get through whatever it is, maybe holding us back or might be worrying us or something that we may feel is an obstacle. But it's something that we can do on our own. You are free to do that on your own. And so the last thing that I'll leave you with is this. If there's anything that I could do to help give you that encouragement, to help give you that little bit of extra oomph to do what you feel God has called you to do, then do not let a moment go by that you don't let me know. Because I want so much for every single one of you to have a deep relationship with this Savior who gave everything for you. Because having that kind of love in your life is a powerful thing, more powerful than any kind of charismatic service or pastor that you could possibly follow. That's our lesson that I have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless. By the way, if you saw that thing back there, it's a World War II artillery round. I have a bunch of random stuff in my office.